Welcome to the A New Narrative podcast, where we discuss all things health and human design. I'm Sam Zagar, your projector guide and host. This is a show about deconditioning. My goal is to confront our conditioned, not self narratives so that we can write them anew through the lens of our true selves. It's through this process that I hope to guide you to your signature life. Welcome back to A New Narrative. I'm your host, Sam Zagar. Today it's just me. You've landed on a solo episode, and this is the first one I've done probably in at least a year. There's probably good reason for that. Let's start with some truth and confrontation. Let's start with some honesty. Sometimes I'm embarrassed by what I record. Obviously. I mean, think about the amount that I record things. I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I've got this podcast. Now I'm on TikTok, which I didn't think was ever going to happen. I'm on Pinterest. I'm on other people's podcasts. I make content all the time. I'm capturing my voice in the moment all the time. And truthfully, sometimes it can be hard to hear back, especially when I've come to a place of new awareness, new perspectives, an embodied experience. You know, my friend Caitlin, who has been on this season of A New Narrative twice already, you're gonna hear about Caitlin a lot because she has been a very mutative force in my life since I met her in December. Now, when Caitlin and I met, she watched my YouTube. And she invited me into a long form work together. She became a package client for 3 months. And she lives on Vancouver Island. We're both Canadian. And my parents live on Vancouver Island. So I was fortunate enough to not only meet her when I went to the island in December, right before we started our work together, but I also got to spend time with her at the end when I went to the island in April. Caitlin's already a powerful force to meet over the internet, but it's quite another thing to meet her in person. You know, for context, she's a 3-5. We really connect over being third lines. She's really great for not making you feel ashamed of anything. She's an MG. Lots of power available. She's a pure individual, so highly mutative, entirely empowering. And, you know, Ra teaches us that the undefined centers can be profit centers in that there's something that has a benefit to sell to somebody else. And really what you're selling is the transformation possible. Caitlin has an undefined solar plexus, and so do I. But I would absolutely venture to say that she was more advanced in her deconditioning than I was. Perhaps one of the reasons for that is because her partner is an emotional projector with the channel of emoting. They've been together since high school. I also don't think that I don't think it's, you know, a chance occurrence. I think it's incredibly perfect and synchronistic that Caitlin's partner has emoting. And the last 2 main partners I've had in my life since I got divorced pre-Saturn return, they've both been emoting partners. I was with the emotional manifestor, who is an emoting manifestor. And I was with an emotional projector, an emoting projector. I think y'all know who I'm talking about. Now, I've also had emotional parents. They're, funny, both of my parents are the channel of mating. My emotional conditioning from my parents isn't fantastic. There's been a lot of avoidance of truth and confrontation. It was heavily modeled to me that you don't talk about things that are uncomfortable. You don't talk about family business outside of the family. And yet also simultaneously, like, I have been someone who's like I started seeing a counselor when I was 11 years old. Like, I've been a kid in therapy from a very early age because people could tell that what was going on in my life was having some pretty negative effects on me. Anyway, as we move through our deconditioning, I believe that we call in people with similar mechanics, but we consistently upgrade those mechanics to a healthier level. Being with my parents was not necessarily good emotional conditioning. Being with Brayton was some of the best emotional conditioning I could get or anybody else could get. I think if you're fortunate enough to be in aura with Brayton, you're gonna learn a lot. And don't get me wrong, it might not be comfortable to learn it. I think that you can be fortunate to learn things that can also be uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to decondition. Now, in a way, what I want to process today, what I want to share, what I want to talk about is a bit of like an objective perspective or a bird's eye view on part of my deconditioning journey, a very recent part of my deconditioning journey, where things have changed for me a lot. And the primary thing that has changed is the way that I feel in my body. Now, season 3 of A New Narrative is quite health focused, but even then, like, you can have mental health, you can have physical health, like, you could have spiritual health, you could have, in many ways, you could still talk about whatever you want and you could put it under the lens of health. But in this episode, I think the core thing that I want to acknowledge is how my body feels. It's odd to say healthy because that can describe a lot of different things for people. The word regulated is probably one of my favorite words right now to describe a state of something. Because dysregulated and unhealthy, like, they're similar, but they're different. I don't feel unhealthy, and I historically wouldn't necessarily say that I feel unhealthy, because unhealthy makes me think of like sick or diseased. As in, the dishealth has gone on so long, it's created like a real problem. Whereas when I think about dysregulated, that to me is like something's out of whack but could be fixed or tweaked or alleviated relatively easily. I have been dysregulated most of my life. Not necessarily unhealthy, but extremely dysregulated. Now, when I think about being dysregulated, I think a lot of that is more mental, even though it's very physical. Like, I might get the sweats or the shakes, but a lot of that is coming from, let's say, my mindset. But when I say my mindset, it's really how I think about my life and my problems. I feel very regulated in my body right now. And in the times when I feel dysregulated, my ability to sense what has happened and how to like get back to a place of stasis, I'm getting pretty good at that. Now, I've had to be like processing this for quite a few months, like very consciously processing this. And again, now I'm going to reference Caitlin. Her word grokked. If you've heard the podcast episodes so far we've done, you've heard the word grokked. which is Caitlin's way of saying something that is entirely embodied. You don't have to think about it. It's in you. You're living it. It's like you can become aware of information. You know, awareness is a first step. And you can take in information. You can talk about it. You can process it. You can, debate it. You can consider it. But it takes a while for information to really get into your cells and for you to live it out in a way that doesn't require you to think about how to live it out. That's a grokked experience. I'm not sure that we're ever fully grokked with human design because it is so deep and so complex. But I think that you can hit checkpoints or milestones. I'm trying to think like what the video game. I think video games have checkpoints, and then for some reason my mind's thinking landmarks, but you get it. I'm like sticking a little flag in the ground for having achieved a deconditioning checkpoint. And the awareness of what that's like and how that's happened is something that feels very important for me to share. So much of my content is me trying to serve my audience. What do you need? That's something that I care about. When you ask for something, I tend to deliver. My ego likes to deliver, especially when it's recognized and compensated. But the podcast has a more personal feeling for me. It always has. I think ever since episode 17 from season 1, I think it's episode 17, the rewriting my money narrative, that episode was so significant for my success. And it was one of the most personal, uncomfortable things I've ever shared. People told me not to share that, and I was like, fuck that, I'm doing it anyway. And it was one of the most liberating things I've ever done. It brought me a lot of success. I know that it is to my benefit to speak my truth. Oh God, I hate that phrase. But to be honest, to share. I'm a third line. What's the point in this life if I'm not sharing my mistakes, my mishaps, my missteps, right? When I started this episode, I was like, man, I've had some embarrassment, which is the nice way for a third line to say shame. And here's one of the things I struggle with. When I share a quote unquote new awareness, I'm excited about it because it's new, it's more advanced than where I've been. But God forbid, a month from now, I have a better awareness or a more developed awareness. Then I'm going to look back at this episode and be like, oh man, I shared when I knew less. And I can just feel not self from undefined centers trying to control what's happening right now. Oh, do you have the right answer? Oh, are you sharing the right concept? Oh, is this how you want to get attention? Oh, is this your love and direction? Oh, is this your truth and confrontation? Is this enough yet, Sam? Should we be putting more out? You could totally go through all of my undefined centers. You could look at the not self and you can see exactly what I'm going to struggle with. I think the nice thing is at this point, I'm struggling less. I don't ever think that I'm going to not struggle with my not self. That's a pipe dream. I'm going to struggle less. And really, I'm going to indirectly help you struggle less. Because the more that I'm honest about this stuff, the easier it gets. Literally, even just talking now, the more that the truth is coming out of me, the easier it's getting to talk. I like to call myself out. I love to call myself out. Because when I call myself out, nobody else gets to do it. The most challenging content I ever share is about my personal relationships. Especially because, as a third line, when you break the bond and remake the bond and break the bond and remake the bond, when you break the bond, you can say a lot of things about what didn't work. And then you remake the bond and you're coming at it from this optimistic place of well, this is how we could try again. And then when it doesn't work, you're like, well, fuck, it didn't work again, right? God, should I have said anything about this? And I feel that third line shame that's in there that's don't talk about this. And I feel that, and I want to rebel against that. I get angry about that. Like, I become an anarchist against my own not self qualities. It's like such a fucking double martyr. I'm gonna attempt to talk about a relationship in a way that kind of like buffers a bit of my future shame. I'm gonna give less details about the relationship per se, but I am gonna speak a lot about my awarenesses and experiences throughout. I find Caitlin's relationship with her husband to be like wickedly inspiring. Absolutely incredibly inspiring. Now they're two pure individuals. One of the coolest things about their relationship is the level of respect that they have for each person's autonomy and individual nature. I am a purely tribal person. So much about how I'm built looks very traditional. I operate in... It's so funny to even call it traditional, but it only seems traditional because of like what's been more mainstream throughout the times that we're more aware of. You know, we're pretty aware of the last 400 years on the planet, which has been the cross of planning, which has been a tribal cross. It's been incredibly, like literally the marriage channel is part of the cross of planning. It's no surprise that, you know, as a purely tribal person, I'm like, I love marriage. Like, I was married. I'm divorced. I still love marriage. I'm quite traditional. You know, really the only thing stopping me from getting married again is divorce. Ain't that a kicker for a tribal person? But also, when I got married, you know, when I look back at how I got married, it is so clear to me that I was a projector that wanted to be chosen. I wanted to be recognized and invited into... I wouldn't call it a lazy life by any means. It was a very, very physically demanding life. I wanted a farm. I wanted like 4 kids. I wanted, and, you know, call it tribal, call it the fact that I've literally grew up on a tribal farm. Like, am I living out my conditioning or am I living out my design? Who knows? It's an interesting thing to think about. But I'm pretty tribal. And there are certain tribal habits that are also, they can be really annoying when you're in human design. Like, you know, a tribal habit is like, you know, marriage, shared bedroom, co-sleeping. I can absolutely love that stuff. Like, I can totally love that stuff when it feels good. But it can also feel really terrible, and I can also really rebel against that stuff. And I can be a total pain in the ass for someone who would be traditionally conditioned, but just in like a homogenized way. You know, someone who's just like, husbands and wives sleep together. You know, like if it were just like a rule that we didn't understand where it came from, because I don't like that. I struggle with relationships a lot. You know, human design... It's almost like putting like an individual layer on somebody. When you live according to your design, you're living in a way, the way that individuals do. You're saying, don't influence me. You're saying, you know, not leave me alone, but like, don't interfere. That's really what you're saying. You're saying, don't interfere. Sometimes I don't want to be interfered with at all. Other times I'm like, get in here, you know, please interfere, fuck this right up. Like, tribal is need, it's dependency, it's touch, it's like, let's fuck this, right, let's get real close, let's be real dependent on each other. I love a level of dependency. Dependency can feel so safe to me and so comfortable. I like being able to depend on someone, to rely on someone, to trust someone. That feels safe to me. And yet I also... want someone who respects me enough to allow me to be myself. And that has such an individual quality to it. I found Caitlin's relationship with her husband to be so inspiring. And as I was looking at their relationship in that way, I was also simultaneously kind of looking at my life and my relationships as like, what do I want? And I really struggle with the question of what do I want? I don't know what I want. You know, trying to think from my mind, what do I want? I know that the answer that I'll come up with is going to be based on not self-crap. I realize for myself as a splenic person, there's very little like future-based, I know what I want. It's much easier for me to go, no, when something comes to me that I don't want. Like, it's really clear for me to have no's. It's so hard for me to have yeses, and it's so hard for me to have yeses that are future-based, especially if it's a yes that feels like it's so out of my control. You know, if I have to wait to be recognized, that makes certain desires, ambitions, goals, like, that stuff will get so muddy so fast. So much of it is unnecessary. I am an efficiency person as a projector. I'm a third line, I gotta figure out what doesn't work. I'm a spleen, I know what to let go of. I'm really good at knowing what's not for me, but I don't think it's the way that our mechanics are supposed to go for us to try and plan and predict the future. And so I left myself kind of open to inspiration about like, you know, I was open to seeing things that would influence me, inspire me, show me a new potential. You know, I became aware of my own limitation. I've got some pretty negative outlooks on relationships. And so knowing that about myself, I was like, all right, let's just put all that stuff to the side. And let's just be open to seeing something different. Let's be open to having somebody show you that there's a possibility that you can't see yet, or you're too pessimistic to see, or you're too jaded to see, or you're too distracted to see, or... And I've been single since last August 2023. And in August of 2023, I made a little deal with myself. You know, these are funny things. You know, I'm going to be single for a year. No boyfriends for a year, Sam. Because it's not hard for me to get into relationships. So I had to kind of make a bit of a like, I could tell it was a bit of an ego commitment. It was like, we're not fucking around with that. Like, we need some space. We need some time. We need to learn some things. We need to see some things. And I just started to like pay attention to the things that felt good to recognize. What did I need to recognize? I recognized a lot about Caitlin's marriage to her partner. One of the things that I recognized is that they're different types. She's an MG, he's a projector. But they have a really good relationship. Also, their relationship is not them being together all the time, 24/7. Like, their relationship is quite different from most that I've seen. It's one that would probably confuse quite a few people because they don't always live in the same house. Sometimes they travel separately, but they're raising their daughter together, and they're very, very much together, but they're not necessarily, like, stuck together or glued together. They're not codependent, but they're so empowering, but it's really beautiful. Like, it's really beautiful. And one of the things that I am so envious about for people who are married, and I know that this is like a weird envy because it's not even accurate, but I am so envious of people who can get into disagreements, debates, fights, uncomfortable conversations, And even when they're really upset with someone, or they're really mad, or their feelings are really hurt, nobody's walking out on the other person. I know that in theory, it's a false sense of comfort, married or not, that you can have hard conversations or you can have challenges and the other person's not going to bail on you. There's no guarantee for that. You know, it's interesting, like the marriage channel is an ego channel. Ego channels make promises. I promise to have and to hold and to love and support in sickness and in health and every time we fucking fight. I did appreciate that when I was married, there was this sense of like, we're not just going to break up because we're having a challenge. Like, we'd have to get divorced. We'd have to split our household. We'd have to like figure out joint custody. Like, there's too many traps. I kind of like the entrapment. There's a level of security in that. And yet also it was really hard to undo it all when I realized it actually wasn't safe or secure or good. But what I'm really acknowledging is what I call the accountability buddy sparring partner. The deconditioning sparring partner. And I said this to Caitlin, as our sessions wrapped up and we just transitioned into being really good friends. I told her, I really like your relationship with your husband. I want something like that. I want to be open to receiving something like that. So there was just kind of this awareness in this space of, I'm ready to get into a relationship again with the right person. I'll know it's a right person because strategy and authority is going to be comfortable with what's going on. As in, I'm going to feel recognized. I'm going to feel seen. I'm going to feel appreciated. It's not going to create energetic problems for me. Like, I'm a non-energy type. If a relationship exhausts me, it's not healthy for me. I don't need a partner to pay me. You got to think about, as a projector, like recognition and compensation. What is that in an intimate relationship? I don't need money from my partner. But I need my partner to not create an energetic deficit within me. My partner needs to bring like enough to the table that their energetic needs. It's weird. It's like, I don't want to say like my partner has to come to the table and like provide for all of their own needs and I'll provide for all of mine. No, because I'm supportive, like, and I love a bargain. Like, I love, like, you do the dishes and, well, I'm a tribal person. I like splitting chores. It's awesome for me if, one person's doing the dishes and one person's vacuuming and, you're doing like your 10-second tidy of your home together or whatever. Like, I like when things have a teamwork component. And I don't follow rules like, if I'm going to be with a man, he needs to, like, don't get me wrong, my brain tried to do that to me at multiple points over the last year. The marketing for single women, oh God, especially the marketing for like a divorced mom in her 30s who's successful in her career, like the way that the world tells me that I should approach dating is like, this man needs to make as much money as I do. This man also needs to be a homeowner. This man also needs to like take care of himself in this way. He needs to have this kind of feeling about children and towards my there are a lot of like almost like rules or expectations, maybe they'll call them standards or boundaries. And if I were to like analyze each one of my partners through that lens, it would eliminate so many good potential people. And I don't like that. I'm looking at things through the lens of human design. I'm not like, they need to be financially as good as I am or better. If I think that way, I know that that line of thought comes from an insecurity that I have that someone's going to take advantage of me. But if I'm living according to strategy and authority, do you really think my spleen is going to let me get into a relationship with somebody who's unhealthy because, they take advantage of me and put me in like a survival place? No. I would get out of that relationship so fast. I don't want to look at things that way. I want to look at things, correctly according to design. I don't need a future partner to know design. But it's a really great benefit if I can have access to their chart, if I can see their design. That's something that feels really important to me. I need to know their design. I don't need them to know about design or how to live according to design, but I would really love to be able to see their design, to know what information I'm working with, because I think one of the most beautiful things in a relationship is when someone has awareness of human design and they can give other people grace in their life because of what they know about them. I'm going to use Maven as an example of this. Like, Maven's young. He doesn't care about human design. He doesn't want to learn about human design. But I know Maven's design. I know that Maven is a pure MG. I know that he's a third line. Knowing Maven's design means that I can extend to him a level of grace, which is way better than like a level of control. If you're looking at someone's design and you're like, well, he's a pure MG, so he should only be asked yes or no questions, and the immediate answer is the answer that we should go with, and he's a third line, so I'm going to expect him to fuck everything up, and he's hot thirst, so he should only be drinking and eating, things above body temperature, and, I could come up with all kinds of rules for someone to live their life to the best of their potential. Or I can just treat Maven according to his design while still respecting the autonomy that he has within himself. I would say, hey, do you want this or this? And if that doesn't work for him, that doesn't work for him. But I'm not going to be like, this is how you have to communicate. If I offer him this warm thing or this warm thing and he says neither and he goes and picks a cold thing, I'm not going to say you're not allowed to have cold things or you're wrong for that or that's a stupid choice or anything. I'm going to be like, interesting. He's responding to a cold thing. I'm going to observe him in his experiment and I'm going to learn through him rather than trying to control him like a little human design puppet. I used to be hyper vigilant in my relationships out of fear. I can tell how my not self and my undefined centers was very, very afraid, very controlling, trying always to predict and prepare for the outcome of everything. I know that's a huge place that anxiety comes from in me. Being quad left, being incredibly strategic with 7 undefined centers, which makes me highly sensitive. I'm always taking things in. It's like I take stuff in and my mind goes, what the hell do we do with this? How do we get out of this? How do we plan? I can see that my design has such a strong potential to be so conditioned, so fearful, so anxious, so neurotic. I recognize that potential in myself, and I recognize the lived experience of that. But I know that when I was in the lived experience of that, without understanding mechanically where it was coming from, I made myself feel bad and wrong. What's wrong with you? Why are you like this? Why can't you? Ooh, it gets me a little emotional. But now that I see how my design has the potential to be, not self, I can work with that. The awareness really, really helps. The awareness helps me not judge myself so much because now I have practical information to be able to work with, to be able to help myself. this is a long warm-up. Well, a lot of this information has been incredibly valid. It is still like a warm-up for me to get to one of the things that I'm trying to say, I'm trying to express. The last time I tried to be in relationship, so last spring, summer, and well before that, last times I was in relationships, it's really clear to me now how much my not self was a problem. You know, the note page for this podcast, this episode, I had to write down a couple of notes. The first line is, "Hi, I'm the problem, it's me." Such a good Taylor Swift song. But yeah, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. And you know, I'm not the only problem. It takes two to tango. We all have problems in relationships. We all have not self tendencies in relationships. But I'm not here to tell anybody else how to fix their not self problems. I'm innocence motivation. I'm here to fix my own problem. I'm here to fix my own problem, and maybe you get something out of that helps you fix your problem too. That's kind of like the hope that there's a benefit for somebody else in what I have to share. You just kind of have to trust that, you know, as innocence motivation, as a role model profile, I just have to trust that what I'm sharing is a benefit to somebody. And even if it's just a benefit to me, that still makes it worth it for me. I struggled a lot in my relationship with the emotional manifestor. I might have struggled more in that relationship than any other relationship. But what I struggled with, like, it was me. And really important backstory to this is that when I met the emotional manifestor, I didn't know anything about human design. So our relationship predates my awareness of human design. I met him as I was just about to hit Saturn return. I had already told my husband that I wanted a divorce. We were polyamorous before we were divorcing and while we were divorcing, so I was dating other people like immediately as soon as we decided to separate. The emotional manifestor was you know what? you can tell I'm having a hard time deciding what to share and what to say, because how I've talked about him historically is not how I'm going to talk about him in the future. Because how I talked about him historically, I didn't take enough responsibility for my part in things, and I didn't have the awareness of how to do so. So I'm giving myself grace because I didn't have awareness then. But I have awareness now. So I have an expectation on myself that I am more responsible with the awareness that I have now. I can recognize that so many of the problems that I had with the emotional manifestor were me problems. And they were lack of awareness problems. Here's an interesting example for story. If he's a manifestor, he's supposed to initiate, right? And I'm a projector. So I'm supposed to wait to be recognized and invited, right? If you look back at the very, 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 very beginning of how him and I met, I was running weed trim crews, and he was a grower in one of the the weed greenhouses, weed shops. As a crew, we moved from place to place to place to place to place. Like, we were always at different shops. And I'm incredibly respectful of other people's places of business. Lots of people smoked. That's very standard in that industry. And at that point in time, I was smoking cigarettes. Yes, disgusting. I was smoking Benson and Hedges menthol super slims. I have tried, I think, 3 times throughout my life to be a smoker, and it has never worked. Like, it's never worked. I've never been able to handle more than like a couple puffs off of a cigarette before I get like really nauseous, crazy dizzy, super head spins. Smoking is not for me. But I've tried, third line, I've tried it a couple of times. I was quite stressed out at that point in my life. Like, quite stressed out. Like, I was waking up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to go do a 5K run, and then getting ready to go to work and going and working a 12-hour labor day. I was like really in my max. But because I was divorcing and trying to start a new like job for myself, I was working as much as I possibly could. And I wanted out of the house as much as I possibly could. So that's just what my lifestyle looked like. And, the emotional manifestor, he like, at the shop, he was like, not nowhere to be found. He just never made himself like a known presence. He never inserted himself in the group. He was not social with the crew. Like, he was very much like, you kind of had to go look for him if you needed him. He didn't talk much. He very much kept to himself. And I obviously found that to be an attractive quality. I do remember the first time that I talked to him. People were smoking, and they were smoking in the building, which I thought was absolutely disgusting. And I wanted to smoke, but I didn't know if we were allowed outside of the building to smoke. So I went downstairs and I said, I'm a social smoker. I need somebody to smoke with me. I don't smoke by myself. I don't want to smoke upstairs. That's gross. Can I go outside and smoke? And will you come with me? And he was like, okay. Like, yeah, okay. Like, not super awkward or anything, but like super low key. Like, he's super low key. And so we went outside, and he pointed to a vehicle and said, whose car is that? And I said, that's my car, because it said Mountain Medicine Holistics on the back of it, because I had started my wildcrafted herbal company, and he was a plant grower. So we definitely had some planty things in common. And it's weird. It's like, I want to say like we hit it off, but like we didn't. It's not that we didn't hit it off either, right? Like, we, a conversation was initiated between us. And that was kind of it. And so I don't think it really started correctly in the beginning, which is why it didn't really start. That's the interesting thing, right? Like, I'd say it didn't start quickly, but it just didn't start. I was an employee, kind of. It was like a subcontractor employee. But I was a really fucking hard worker. Like, I was a really good worker. I was totally the projector super slave. I would volunteer to stay longer on any job. I would do the job no one else wanted to do. Like, I really like proved my worth. And because of that, I mean, it's not much of a ladder to climb, but I went from working on a crew to running the crew very, very quickly. When we went to the shop that he worked at, there were jobs that sucked. And one of them was, it's called running the machine. And it's just this really, 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 really loud machine. It's terrible noise. Nobody wants to do it. And you got to do it for like hours and hours and hours and hours. And so when my boss was like, who wants to run the machine? I said, I'll do it. And I offered to stay late until the machine was done, which meant I ended up staying longer. And it was just me and the emotional manifestor. And I was recognized for my efforts. And I was invited to come back separately from my crew to pick up extra hours doing other jobs there. And I needed the money. So I did it. You know, you could say there's a little bit of recognition, invitation, and compensation, but I wasn't being recognized for the thing that I actually wanted to be recognized for. If you fast forward to the time where him and I got into a relationship, you'd laugh because there's a day that I looked at him and I was like, so are you my boyfriend yet? You know? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, cool. You know, like, it's like I asked, he responded. Like, again, that doesn't feel correct. But I started telling people a story of how we ended up going on what I called, like, I guess our first date. And after I had done a couple, like, odd jobs for him at work, I was leaving work one day and I was hungry. And I was like, I'm going to go get some tacos. You can come if you want to. And he was like, okay. So we went and got tacos. I tell the story like I invited him to go get tacos. And that's how, like, we separated from work to, like, some type of dynamic outside of work. That was the transition to the non-work relationship. From my perspective, I initiated the relationship. And then I would get bitter about it. Like, as time went on and I got into human design, and then I looked back at the beginning of our relationship, I started to be like, whoa, maybe this didn't start right, which created a huge insecurity for me in the relationship because I got perfectionist problems. So once human design came into the picture and it gave me all of this, like, you know, this is your strategy, this is their strategy, this is your authority, this is their authority, I started to look back at things historically and go, uh-oh, what if these things didn't start the right way? And, you know, I'm looking at the story like I initiated this relationship so many ways, so many times. Fuck. But I tell the story and he got mad one time and, you know, Manifestor anger. And I was like, what? And now, let me point out, he's got a passive brain and a receptive mind. He's got a really good memory. I don't. I do not have a good memory. And he told me that he asked me for my number and I rejected him. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? And he said there was a day at work, very, very early on. And he asked me for my number. But when he asked me for my number, he said something about, like, his boss. I can't remember what the context was. It might have had something to do with my herbal company. But when he asked for my number, my brain heard it like, it's not for him, it's for his boss. And wanting to be as professional as I could be, I gave the emotional manifestor my business card, which only had my email on it. It didn't have my phone number on it. So when I gave him my business card, he took that as a rejection of me giving him my phone number, which communicated to him that I didn't like him enough or trust him enough or feel safe enough with him to give him my phone number. And he followed up with an email. But again, the email was like, you know, my boss wants to talk about this or whatever. And so it's like, I felt like he was wanting to initiate me, but also like using his boss a little bit to do that. And I can see the shyness quality of the manifestor doing that. But it was interesting that I had a narrative of how the relationship started that was like, I initiated and I did it all wrong and it's never going to work. Like, it created a really bad narrative for me. Whereas his narrative was like, I asked her out and she cold-shouldered me. So one of the things that stands out to me is one person's perspective on thing is rarely accurate. Like, rarely accurate. My perspective on what happened is distorted, and it's through my own lens. And even when something comes through your own lens, it can be distorted. You know, you can be transferred in your view. You can be distracted. Things can not be as they really, not often things are perceived not as they really are. So recognizing that often things are not taken the right way, you know, that gives me like some humor when I want to look back at certain parts of my life and be like, okay, we may have misunderstood the assignment there. Like, no shame, no blame, no judgment. Just, what awareness do we have now, and how are we going to try again? For the first couple years of human design, I applied human design to my relationship through like a curiosity, but also a perfectionist insecurity of like, oh no, is this what I had done wrong? Is this why it didn't work? Is this what I did wrong? Is this why it didn't work? Whether I was looking at friends, career, money, relationships, like I started to become hyper analytical about everything that had happened in my life through the lens of human design. And if you look at my mechanics, I'm somebody who can become like negatively neurotic. Being as undefined as I am, that's a lot of places for the not self to get really loud. Being, an active brain and strategic, that's a lot of trying to plan for stuff that we don't know about. I'm ADHD, whether you want to look at that according to my design or separately from my design. I have a hyper focus problem. I can become so fixated on something and so blind to other things. I can be really, 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 really neurotic about things, really obsessed with things. Before I got the ADHD diagnosis, other potential things they were wondering if I had were OCD and bipolar. Because I can be like really intense and really not. And really obsessive neurotic about certain things and also not. I'm also someone who has a history of panic attacks. There's that it's a cluster of like my splenic fears, my 64 and 63 undefined mind, my catastrophic thinking. Like, I can see so many ways in which my design can be very challenging to operate. Caitlin also uses a word, eclipsed. She talks about how sometimes when you're in an experience, you are eclipsed by like a past experience, a past trauma. It's like you kind of leave the moment that you're in and you end up entering into this like shaded experience, as in an experience with a different coloring on it. I can see how historically in my relationships, conflict has made me like recall moments of trauma, and that eclipses me. That takes over in the moment. It takes me out of my body, out of my authority. One of the things that I said about the emotional manifestor in content that I've made over the last year, it might be in the video, like something about being a single projector. I talked about the emotional manifestor, and I said that he was not supportive of my human design career. And that's not a true statement. The reason the statement felt true at the time was because from my perspective and my memory, there were a lot of conversations that him and I had had about human design where I ended up crying. Now, it had this feeling of like a bit of a victim, like, you made me cry. As in, like, I wasn't crying before this conversation. You have this conversation with me, and now I'm like an emotional hot mess. This can't be good for me. This can't be healthy for me. Like, you should be, recognizing my intelligence in this system. You shouldn't be challenging my intelligence and making me defend myself and making me feel stupid. And I kept that narrative with me for so long. You made me cry. You made me defend myself. Like, that's such yucky victim crap. Projectors can be really bad for that. But this isn't like, I'm not blaming projectors. I'm blaming me. I'm taking personal responsibility for this. This is one of the things that I'm like, it's important for me to get to. I'm taking personal responsibility for this. He didn't make me cry. He didn't make me defend myself. I was absolutely eclipsed in those moments by previous experiences and traumas that made me freak the fuck out and act from my not self and absolutely sabotage the potential for communion over something. Because truthfully, if he didn't ever support my human design career, he wouldn't have made like 100 silkscreen t-shirts. He wouldn't have gone on like countless drives and hikes and adventures with me to film content. He wouldn't have done research to help me figure out like what camera to buy. He wouldn't have encouraged me to go on YouTube. He was the one who was like, why aren't you on YouTube yet? That's recognition. I definitely felt like an asshole for saying some of the things that I said about our relationship, because I recognize now how it was coming from a place of lack of awareness. This is why it is hard to be a public content creator, especially within a system that is so based on deconditioning, because you're consistently going, oh man, now that I know what I didn't know before, right? Should I take down all my old content and only put out my newest one? And in that vein, it's like I should only put out next week's episode, and then I should delete last week's, and then I should only put out next week's, and then I should delete last week's. That doesn't actually help people. I'm not ashamed of my process. Part of me wants to be, but I'm not going to let that take over or win. I can tell all the ways in which my not self freaked the fuck out. And I can also tell how I made that somebody else's problem. And then I spoke publicly about it. I'm not an easy person to be in relationship with, especially because I'm such a public person. You're really risking, like, your experiences with me being, turned into content in some way. I talk about my own experiences, and if you're a part of my experiences, you're going to get acknowledged in some way or another. When I did the work that I did with Caitlin, and really when she did her work on me, when she recognized and invited me at my mom's house and she was like, can I do stuff to you? And we did the vocal stuff and we did the breathing stuff. There was so much that had to do with my jaw, like relaxing and opening my jaw. And so much of the visuals that came through were female. I saw myself, I saw my mom, I saw my grandma, I saw the female energy of the last child I was pregnant with. That was a miscarriage. I saw a lot of ancestral female stuff. But when she did the stuff with my jaw, one of the first awarenesses that I had as I was like, coming back to myself from the experience was, whoa, this is what the emotional manifestor was trying to do to me. Caitlin had this ability to say, like, you're not speaking as yourself. That's not your voice. But she could recognize, like, where my real voice was hiding and how to access it and how to empower me to bring it out. I know that the emotional manifestor didn't necessarily know how to empower me to get me to use my voice. But I know that he really did want me to use my voice. It was important for him to help me access that. But I know that he didn't necessarily really know how. And it wasn't his job or his responsibility. He wasn't the right person for that. Caitlin was the right person for that. And there's a really good chance that Caitlin is the right person for that because she's a woman. There are many reasons why she was the right person for that, but one of the biggest ones is that she's a woman, and there was a level of safety, comfort, familiarity, like all the ancestral stuff that I saw was female-based. But there was the awareness of like where my jaw was tight, where I wasn't speaking my truth, where I wasn't being myself. There was the awareness that like the emotional manifestor also knew that I was locked up there, and he was also trying to bring that stuff out of me. But the way that he was trying to bring it out of me before was almost like in more of a challenge rather than like an encouragement. I needed Caitlin because she has the awareness and the experience of like how to hold the space for the person afterwards, how to help them like come back together. But what she did was she turned my voice on in a different way. She gave me access to my voice differently. And when she did, when I was able to actually integrate that, when I had grokked the experience from her, I did a shocking thing. And I called the emotional manifestor, and we hadn't talked for almost a year. But I owed him an apology. I owed him a truth and confrontation. And I had finally reached a point where I wasn't avoiding it. Now I need to go hop into a session. But I know that this is part one of an extended story. I wasn't sure what I was going to share. But I'm going to leave you on the awareness that truth and confrontation was a significant thing for me to start working with in my life. And the results, the effects, the outcome have been incredible, shocking, liberating. And I'm still processing and understanding this. I'm still recognizing the effect of what happened. I'm going to have a lot more to share, but you're going to have to wait for that episode. I'll catch you next time.